Hey there viewers, Eric O here. Today in this video I'm going to show you how to replace the ignition switch in your 2001 GMC Jimmy or S-10 Blazer, whichever one you're working on. We diagnosed this in a previous video. The vehicle came in with a no start, cranks okay but does not have spark condition, so I'll put a link to that in the description below. Now in a previous video we had already removed this hush panel here, so if you haven't done that already, go ahead and do so. There's 4 screws that hold that on. You'll need a 7mm socket or nut driver. Then just lay that down and set it up against the brake pedal. You don't have to unhook the OBD2 connector or any other connectors on there. Now once that is off, come up underneath here on the park and brake assembly. You'll see the park and brake release cable, and you'll see how that's held on there. So just go ahead and pop that out of its bracket and unhook the cable and just leave that hanging. What we want to do next is we want to remove this knee bolster. Take your 7mm, there's a couple screws in that. You're going to see the screws that run across the bottom edge of it. Go ahead and get those. There's another screw up under there that holds a small vanity light on, or courtesy light, so go ahead and get that. Now once all the screws have been removed out of it, there's going to be a metal retainer here and there's going to be a metal retainer here. What we want to do is just pull straight back on this trim piece to release it, and then feed the parking brake release cable up through the hole. And that whole piece will come right off for you. The next thing we can do, being that we're right in this area, go underneath the steering wheel, go ahead and tilt it up all the way if you have a tilt column. There's going to be a T25 screw here and a T25 screw here that we're going to need a Torx bit for. We're just going to go ahead and remove those. Once you got those out, remove your tilt release lever here simply by pulling straight out on it. That'll pop that lever right out. The next thing we want to do is release this lower half of the steering column cover. Usually just snap apart. Unsnap the front, then they kind of hinge in the back. You'll see it has these little curly hooks on there on both sides. That's what hooks onto the upper half of the cover first. You'll see when we put it back together. Our next step is remove the upper steering column cover. In order to do that, it's kind of tricky. There is a small bolt, see if I can zoom in on that for you, right there. It's an inverted Torx bit. It takes an E5 socket, so we're going to go ahead and remove that and then remove the upper column cover. So that's what this looks like. Like I say, just a little tiny sucker. Takes an inverted Torx. Tilt your wheel back down. You should be able to snake your upper cover out, right up and out of there. The next thing you want to do is remove the actual metal knee bolster itself. Up and on the side of each side, there's 4 nuts. They're going to take a 10mm, and we're going to zip that out of there. Go ahead and disconnect our electrical connector. It's going to use the same 7mm socket or nut driver we've been using the whole time. Just go ahead and keep unscrewing it until it unplugs. Now that we've got that unplugged, let's go through and cut some of our zip ties. Move this cover here. Pinch this little tab together on this white clip. Open that up. Alright, looks like we got our harness free. Now let's disassemble our connector. Got a gray and a black half here. Make it so the connector faces you. Stick a little screwdriver in there and just give it a slight pry outwards, and you'll push that right out. You're going to do the same thing for the black side. Stick a screwdriver in there, just enough to release the latch, You'll be able to push it right out towards you. When you're all done, you'll end up with 3 halves, or, well, I guess it wouldn't be halves, you'll end up with 3 pieces. Next thing we want to do is unhook our security wires here. A little push tab. And then we have this, I believe it's the key in ignition switch they call it. It's what makes your little buzzer go off. This is a little tricky to get to. Come up on the top side with a pick. A little release tab on there. Give them a quarter turn and they pop right out. And the next thing that we want to do, we've got those 2 wires unhooked. We need to remove the actual switch itself. You have to reach through this hole here and this hole right here with a pick. You'll see when I push in on those how they're kind of spring loaded. There's 2 little spring loaded retainers that actually hold this switch in. So we're going to release one, then release the other. Being that this switch is junk, I'm just going to hold down on these 2 wires because they won't cause any damage. And then pull the switch out. One thing that's fair to mention is make sure you have your lock cylinder in the lock position before you pull this out. And that's because this actually has to be timed. So you're going to look at the gear set here. See how you've got this open notch right in this area? When we stick the new switch in, we're going to make sure that this is in the same exact position, because as you can see, our ignition switch is gear driven and it rotates. Okay, so in the position that it was in is obviously the off and locked position. Flicked ahead 1 spot is the accessory position. Then we'll go back to off. 1 more click is the on position. 1 more click is the run position. And that there is the start position. So we want to make sure whatever position we had it in, or we removed it in, we stick it back in. So it's pretty easy to tell with this open notch right here in this bottom corner. We're going to take and put the new switch that way and then insert it back in there. Got our new switch here from Advance Auto. I'll show you a couple things before we put this in. These are the retainers that we had to push in when we removed it. A little spring-loaded one there. This is the one on the other side. That's what we had to do to remove it. Now you can see this one, I took it out of the box. It's in the accessory mode. So we're going to click it back 1 spot until it's in the off position. Like I say, this is on, run, and then start. So it's got pretty positive clicks on it. We'll set it right where it was when we took it out. We're going to insert it back in there. Because this is a cheap Chinese aftermarket switch, I'm going to recall my previous statement. It does not seem to have a positive detent in the off position. So I'm going to flick it forward to the accessory position, insert my key and put that in the accessory position, and then insert my switch. I think that's the safest way to do this. Or perhaps you could have put it in the run position or something of that nature, but being that I didn't have a really positive detent in the off position, I think that's the best thing to do. We're going to reinstall our security wires. We're going to reinstall our key and ignition little switch here. It's like we took it out. Now you're going to start that about a quarter turn off from where it ends, and then click that right in there where it belongs. Now that we've got that in, let's start routing some of our wires back where they belong. We don't want any of these to get pinched or chafed through. Once we get down here, we're going to want to hook our connectors back together. Now if you didn't pay attention which way these came apart, it doesn't really matter because they only go back together one way. Like I say, you can't mess these up. Just make sure the little detent faces towards the inside, and that's one you had to pry off with a screwdriver, or just pry out on a little bit. Just click them back together, and then you'll have your connector all done. Now before we get too anxious about getting all these wires back where they belong, we've got our connector together. Let's just go ahead and plug that in and get that screwed back in there how it belongs. Just go ahead and line it up. Get that screw to start. You definitely don't want to strip that out. Once you get that started, just go ahead and snug it up. And what we're going to do, being that we're using just this, really crappy aftermarket parts, we're going to make sure that the vehicle starts before we go through and take the trouble of putting it in 100%. So, got that plugged in. This vehicle was a no start, cranks okay previously. Make sure the accessory mode works. That appears to work. Shuts off, key comes out. Oops. This thing's been sitting for a long time, so it doesn't really like to start right up, but you can see that all obviously works. The little dinger works, so I don't know. Switch is pretty pretty crappy. You might better get one from GM if you're doing this, or if you really don't care, just take your chances with an aftermarket one. But I'm going to go ahead and get the zip ties. We're going to put them back on where we took those off and reroute this harness. Gone ahead and zip tied this back where it was. You remember where the zip ties were when you cut them off. So put that black sheath back on there, hook them back in that white clip. Gone through and tested all the functions of the switch, the accessory mode, the on-off. We've gone ahead and made sure the vehicle does start. That was our initial problem. So now that we've done that, we just need to go ahead and put the car back together. I'm not going to show you the whole video on that because, well, obviously you took it apart, so we just need to reverse that procedure. A couple things I will tell you is the only tricky part really are the column covers. These easily get broken. So we installed the top one first. You're going to put that Torx bit back in there, the one that took that E5 Torx bit. Then you're going to install the bottom cover. Now when I remove these, I told you about these little hooks right here. So you'll see the corresponding, the male half of that. So let's assume this is on. You're going to hook that in first and then push the top up until they lock together. So you can kind of see how that works, outside the vehicle. So like I say, put the hooks on, push the bottom up, click it together. It's a little bit trickier because these have to go behind the steering wheel. If you want to do it 100% like GM says, pull the airbag, pull the steering wheel. If you want to fiddle with it for a minute, just do it like I did it, and you'll be able to get those on no problem. I think that's about it. Your tilt lever that you pulled out, that's just going to snap back in there, and everything else is pretty well straightforward. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helps you in changing your ignition switch in your S-10 Blazer or Jimmy. If it does, please give a thumbs up on this video here, and please just subscribe to our channel and check us out on Facebook.